This podcast is made possible by High Radius.
Hi, this is Craig Abrams, President and CFO of Playtika, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 813.
I've got to make sure that we invest in all the right places and we don't constrain ourselves from a spending perspective. We've got to do whatever it takes to speed up our network so we can move product and decongest the entire U.S. supply chain. The second thing is I've got to continue to develop the talent inside my own finance organization so that we can continue to be a really good partner for our business colleagues, our operation folks, as well as our marketing and IT folks. So those are the key priorities right now.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Mark George, CFO of Norfolk Southern Corporation. Back in the late 1980s, when Mark George first joined the accounting team at Otis Elevator, he recalls fixed asset accounting not being what he expected. As part of a fixed asset accounting strategy, George was tasked with placing barcodes on new pieces of furniture the company had recently acquired. From that time forward, George tells us he had an aversion for manual work and processes. How do I get away from doing this? George tells us he asked himself. Just how Mark George answers that question would, in the years ahead, open the door to new opportunities and eventually the CFO office. Our interview with CFO Mark George begins after this. Did you know more than 60% of B2B invoices are paid late? Well, then it should come as little surprise that the priorities of finance leaders have shifted towards accelerating cash recovery and scaling business growth. To address this issue, High Radius now connects your credit, billing and invoicing, cash application deductions, and collections into a single business process and empowers your finance team to champion your business's high-performance culture. More than 700 of the world's leading companies have transformed the office of their CFO with High Radius. Unlock working capital and reduce bad debt with the best AI-powered accounts receivable management software. To learn more, visit us at highradius.com. Hello, we're speaking with Mark George, CFO of Norfolk Southern. Mark, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Jack. Glad to be here.
So it's been a while. I think we've had only one other rail CFO on, and we've had quite a few episodes. So thank you for joining us, and we are especially looking forward to your story. I know you've got an interesting background. So we always begin with this question, Mark. As you might know, we begin by asking you to take a look back for us. Try to identify those experiences you feel prepared you for a CFO role. What would those be?
Well, look, I've got 30 years of work experience, actually 33 years by now, and I really started at the bottom of the finance ranks. I don't have a pedigreed background. I went to a state college, Central Connecticut State University. I put myself through school while I went to school, and I couldn't even get a job out of college through the normal recruiting path. So I ended up joining a temp agency. And my first temp assignment actually happened to be in a very large company that was based where I grew up, a company called Otis Elevator, which was part of the United Technologies conglomerate. So I got this, what was really supposed to be a 3-month temp assignment. And it turned into a 6-month temp assignment. And then eventually it became a permanent job because sadly the person who vacated the position, ended up having to leave the company. So they created a permanent position for which I interviewed. I didn't even get it automatically, but ultimately I did get the job, and that was the start of my career. And I spent 30 years with that same company slash group. And while I was a finance major coming out of college, the temp job and my first permanent job inside this company was actually an accounting position. So I was a little bit of a fish out of water, Jack, because I understood accounting to some degree, but I was definitely not an accountant. So I had to quickly adapt and learn in order to survive and succeed. But what I learned earlier in my career is that I had a penchant for process improvement and trying to improve the quality of the work that I was being asked to do. And I, at that point in 1989, PCs and operating in a higher technology world was just really coming in to be. So I found that I had an acumen for that and did a lot of automating. And I built a little bit of a name for myself by process improvement and automation. So I moved around those first 7 years and pretty much did every function within finance in those first 7 years to round me out. And I was never really asking for moves, but I was being pulled by different leaders because I built a reputation for process improvement. So I moved around from accounting into treasury, and from treasury into financial planning and analysis, and then I did FP&A for a while before moving over into M&A, which was a brand new function, and that happened to be in the finance world. And then I got pulled back into treasury, and then eventually, due to my M&A work and my treasury background, you know, I got I got some exposure to some of our international M&A jobs and got pulled overseas to work on a couple of deals. And with that, our regional headquarters out in Asia actually asked me to go out and work in Asia and take a permanent job there, which I did. So I had my first assignment in 1997. I went out to Singapore and basically ran treasury, asset management, and M&A for the Asia Pacific region. And that was really a signature job for me because it gave me a much broader set of skills, and it put me in a position to learn hands-on on the ground in the operations. And frankly, at that time in 1998, we had the great financial crisis, the Asia financial crisis, that we had to really innovate around because most of our subsidiaries at that point had technically gone bankrupt. So we had to go find funding for them to stay afloat. So either soliciting for recapitalizations from the parent or going to find local financing from Chinese banks that were very, uh, put a lot of scrutiny in who they wanted to lend money to back then. And as well as, Korea, Southeast Asia, all of these markets became, extremely stressed, and I found myself learning on the fly. So those kind of experiences really lended a lot to my development. You develop a lot of credibility to become a CFO in a global business like that when you actually have served overseas and you have firsthand knowledge and experience about not just the operations, but the way the international system works, the global enterprise and the global economic system. So you can speak from a position of knowledge, and that certainly helps give you credibility.
Now, in corporate history, and this came before you, no doubt, but United Technologies, are you aware, when did they first acquire Otis? Was that 20 years earlier, or when did that happen?
It was actually a hostile acquisition that took place in 1975. And then in 1976, United Technologies purchased Hostily Carrier because at that point, United Technologies had been just an aerospace company. And the former CEO at that point wanted to diversify into commercial buildings to move away from the peaks and troughs that aerospace brings. So that diversification brought to it those two businesses, which subsequently in the past 2 years have spun off again to be independent businesses, both Otis and Carrier.
And of course, as you were explaining to us, you land there, you get through, as you explained to us, the first open door, and you could have gone any direction, but it seemed like you, from the start,
Yeah.
began building relationships with people. That's the original door that opened. And then we see you sit as the CFO of not only Otis eventually, but again, as you just mentioned, Carrier Corp. Is that right? And then another division as well. Multiple divisions and companies under the UT umbrella. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, that is, Jack, and it was one of the beauties of United Technologies is they really cherish and develop finance talent and then moved it around. We found strong talent and we moved them division to division, not just to develop them, but also to bring learnings over to the other divisions. Obviously, that enterprise is no longer, but now I bring all of that over to Norfolk Southern, and which is a great company, a completely different industry. I go from commercial commercial buildings uh, in terms of what you provide at both Carrier and Otis to now transportation, which is a very unique animal and something I'm frankly still adapting to. I think I probably found moving from Otis to Carrier easier than it is from moving over here to the railroad space.
I Yeah, one can imagine. And we want to talk to you about Norfolk Southern, but I'm going to ask you to look back a little more for us because I'm still struck by how you arrived inside Otis and how you distinguished yourself in your very early period there. Because I think it's interesting. Again, you didn't come with an accounting degree. You came sort of with a willingness to help where you could, and it sounded like you got familiar with automation or with some of the tools that could be used in finance. I'm wondering, like, had you used Excel before you arrived at Otis? And maybe you had, but maybe it's something you picked up. What would you tell us?
No, no, I didn't actually. I wasn't even that resourceful in college on the computer. Again, we're going back to the late '80s, mid '80s. I did use Lotus 123, and I think I used a word processing program through college. But I came in, and some people just have an acumen for using software and technology tools. Other people struggle with it, and I discovered that I had an acumen for it, and I was able to figure things out fairly quickly. So I also knew that I did not like menial tasks. So a lot of the early work I had coming in back in those days were really embarrassing work. Things like fixed asset accounting, where you had to run around and put barcodes on any new piece of furniture or assets that the company buys, and you're maintaining ledgers on mainframe computers and AP vouchers that you physically have to punch and walk around and get signatures. And I was always thinking about how do I get away from doing that? So I'd propose either policy changes or ways to automate processes to get myself out of doing things that I didn't like. And I do give me more stuff to do and more stuff to automate. And if at some point they tire of me or they want me to go somewhere else, I'll get another job. And I was young enough and naive enough to think that it would be that easy. It never came to that where they fired me because I worked my way out of a job. It played out the way I thought, which is I build a rep as being that kind of problem solver, and they'd give me more problems to solve. And I found leaders fighting over me at points in my career because they wanted me on their team because I did just that. And I'd say the other thing, I've learned a lot of lessons in 30 years because I know when I came back from Asia and I had been CFO in Asia before I had come back, and I had moved around quite a bit. And I looked back at some of those people I had joined with 15 years prior, and I looked at why I was at a certain level, much higher, and others languished. They didn't necessarily ascend at the same rate.
Okay, but the other thing that you mentioned, or I'd like to understand better, I think the other door opener for you was M&A, which eventually I think leads you to Asia. I mean, it's one of the reasons you got involved in M&A that maybe, and you can clarify for us. But I was curious, was there any hesitancy? Was this just another example of where you said, sure, I'll help with that? Where there was an M&A, I don't know what it might have been, something related to an possible M&A deal that you became, in a junior role involved with and was able to solve a problem or help in some ways or anything like that, because that really did become a door opener for you. I have a sense, or clarify for us.
Yeah. Yeah, at that point, we were in a we decided we were going to be in an acquisitive mode of deals that were really part of the core. We weren't going to go and try to acquire companies that were either adjacencies or might expand our core. So I, at the headquarters, was involved in reviewing all the proposals that were coming in, building valuation models to evaluate the financial sense that they would make, but also packaging them to make sure that we had support at the corporate level for them. And so I would be responsible for scrutinizing deals.
Hmm.
And what we learned early on, we started doing deals in Europe and then eventually in Asia. I would go out and I would actually sit with the local team. And instead of sequentially waiting for proposals to come to us, I would get involved with them and work alongside and package it as we go and help work on the valuation of a business so that we're mindful during the bidding process and not second guessing after the fact. So basically, the regions appreciated that because I did it without a sense of cynicism or skepticism, but with a sense of collaboration and help. And so certainly when I got out to Asia, where things became a lot more complex, um, there had been a meltdown, as an example, in Asia with the Asian financial crisis, and we had a deal in Korea that we were going to go buy one of the three main elevator companies. We decided that we were going to actually abandon ship on the small one and go after the biggest one because the IMF had come in to take control of Korea, the Korean economy, and they were forcing the big chaebols to divest of assets. So we were now negotiating with LG, who had an elevator business. So this was a very, very large acquisition that we were going to do where we didn't have a footprint before. And so the regional headquarters for Asia really appreciated the work I was doing to try to help them navigate a very complex environment. And that is what led them to say, to inquire back at headquarters later, hey, we could use Mark out here. He's got treasury experience, he's got M&A experience, and it'd be really useful for us if he's willing to go overseas. So that's when I got the call, and I had now the exposure to them from working with them, and it was always a dream of mine to work overseas, anyways. And that's how that opportunity kind of came to fruition. So I relocated, and then eventually was responsible for integrating the acquisition that we culminated. So I spent an awful lot of time up in Korea working on integrating the deal into our business.
One last item here. I'm curious about. Again, I think many of us would be surprised by certain aspects of the elevator business. I mean, we can imagine the nature of the business, but the business model behind it from a finance perspective. I'm wondering what part of that financial model, as you compare notes with peers from other industries, what might surprise them about the elevator business? Maybe it's who the customer actually is. Maybe we assume this is the customer, and no, actually, that's not the customer. Can you just give us a snapshot of that world? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is a business that is very unique. I mean, there's some complexity in that it involves the sales and manufacturing of an industrial product. So that has its own unique attributes. But on top of that, it's a construction business, and in many cases, the construction projects will last multiple years. Could be as long as 5 or 6 years on some very large high-rise or big infrastructure projects. And then, so that has its own unique accounting and financial risks that come with managing it. So now it's not just manufacturing and sales, but it's construction, which is unique. And then after that, you have decades of aftermarket service, which is its own business model, where you're dealing with commercial service in the aftermarket. So it's the blending of those three type of businesses all in one, because you're doing all of this in-house. You're not outsourcing the sales. You don't have third-party distribution to sell it. You're not outsourcing the construction of it. You're doing it yourself, and it's the same thing with the aftermarket service. So it's managing all three of those and how they all tie together that make it a very, very unique business.
So we do want to find out about Norfolk Southern, of course. It has a long history, and it's the rail industry again has been through so many different chapters. So, but tell us about this company today. What is the vision of this company today, really? What would you share with us?
Yeah, Jack, thanks. I think one thing I want to clarify about that business is really we are one of six Class 1 railroads in North America that move freight. We operate largely east of the Mississippi, where 70% of consumption takes place. And one way to think about this is we essentially transport the U.S. economy. We move consumer products, automobiles, food and agriculture like grain, lumber, paper, metals, plastics, all sorts of industrial products, as well as energy sources like coal, oil, natural gas, even solar panels and wind turbines. So we move the economy and we interchange with the other railroads to make sure we cover the continent. And market trends are creating opportunities for us. Our customers are moving back from just-in-time supply operations. Manufacturing is coming back to the U.S. and warehouse capacity is expanding. So we serve all of that. And our customers actually prefer to ship by rail, especially when it's not the most time-sensitive natured product. We provide better cost and value to them. We create a lot more capacity. We have very, very large freight cars. And our sustainability story in particularly is very, very compelling. Um, Basically, one train removes 200 trucks from our public highway system. And think about that. We move things on our own infrastructure, so we don't have the safety concerns like you have in the highway system with all of that heavy freight moving around. But on the sustainability side, we can move a ton of freight 440 miles on a single gallon of fuel. So that's pretty attractive. And we move, the rail industry in general, we move 45% of all the freight ton miles that are out there, but we only consume 7% or we only produce 7% of freight emissions on average. So it's a very, very attractive sustainability story for our customers. So that's why they like us. And that's why we like being part of this new world economy. We think we have a role to play. So while the industry has been relatively stagnant in the past, we think that this move towards sustainability provides a great growth platform for us in the future. So we are investing to grow, and we think it's our mission, our noble mission, to take trucks off the highway and bring them onto our infrastructure that we're investing so much money in. Makes our
Wow.
highways safer, and it makes our air cleaner.
Well, a wonderful overview for us. I was struck by just thinking of you arriving really in 2019. And we always like to talk about lines of sight, as in metrics and numbers that finance gets to see. But here, as you just described for us, you have these lines of sight into freight that's shipping around the country, all the types of goods and what have you. I'm wondering if you can just reflect a little bit as you stepped into the job and you realized, wow, this is going to give me greater visibility into the economy at large that I never enjoyed
Well,
before.
you're exactly right, Jack. It's remarkable because we touch everything. So every morning we're looking at all the economic trends, but more fun than that is actually talking to our customers in all these various industries and taking the pulse of what's happening in the economy. And sometimes when you watch the news and you listen to pundits speculate, you actually have greater insight because you're talking to your customers. You're talking to your paper customers or your steel customers or your auto customers, and we've got an incredible network here of commercial folks inside this company that I'm blown away by how they have their finger on the pulse. And every day we're having dialogues to exchange what they're hearing from their customers. And it really is a window into what's happening, not just in the U.S. economy, but the global economy at large.
So we've heard about supply chain issues from many finance leaders. Here again, you have lines of sight that many of us don't. Can you just share with us what your take is on the challenges there, and how is your organization addressing them?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about supply chain. It's a very, very broad a topic. We are clearly an integral part of it. The whole supply chain is the network that involves marine shipping, uh, trucking, as well as the rail network and even barges that go up and down the rivers. And when we talk about trucking, it involves the local drayage moves between rail and the warehouses. So there's a lot of people in the middle of all of this, and we all have our own unique challenges. There's a shortage of warehouse spacing, there's backups at the port. A lot of it is rooted in labor. We all have our labor challenges, whether it's the rails, whether it's trucking or the drayage community. So we all have to resolve that, and it is a real challenge because in many cases we're competing for the same talent pool, along with housing construction and warehousing. So labor is very much at the root of some of this. But I really also believe, Jack, that when you knock, we had a seamless world economy working in concert with one another, and it was really operating well coordinated and synchronized. And when you shut down the global economy for 3, 4 months, whatever it was back in 2020, and you're trying to restart it from a dead stop, uh, it is difficult. It took us decades to get to this well synchronized system pre-COVID, and now we're trying to get everything ramped up simultaneously. But you have assets that are not in the right position. You have empty containers in some places where the factories need them, but they're on the other side of the world. You've got the same problem with trucks. And so we've really been knocked off the axis, and it's taking a long time for us to get resynchronized with each other. Um, so labor's part of it. The dislocation of assets is another part. Sadly, we're in the middle of it all too, and we're all doing our parts to bring the system back into sync.
Now, for those who want to ship, but it takes a little longer, but there's some savings involved there in this inflationary times. Is this a nice cost alternative? I am just connecting some obvious dots here, but one would think,
It is, Jack. I mean, when people are shipping via truck, um, trucking costs are really comprised of labor and fuel. So when you see diesel fuel prices rise the way they are, the cost of trucking rises exponentially. On top of that, every truck needs one driver, and we can move a couple hundred trucks equivalent of load with just one or two crew. So we don't have the same type of cost profile that the trucking industry does. Yes, we also consume diesel fuel, but because we consume so much less per ton than they do, we have this incredible pricing umbrella above us that our customers really want to be on our railroad. And our issue is really just capacity right now. We could probably double our size if we could get the resources in place because there's such high demand for moving via rail
now
right now.
can you tell us a little bit about those numbers that matter in the industry? Those people who follow this industry, what are they always asking Mark about? What is it? What are those numbers you're keeping a close eye on daily? What would those be?
Sure. I mean, one of the things we look at very closely is our carload volumes. We want to make sure that we're growing our volumes on a regular basis, and we track that daily and weekly. And we're trying to grow that as we get through the back half of the year. To do that, we need our network to move quicker. And the best analogy is probably on the airline side. We look at on-time departures and arrivals, and much in the same way that an airline does. So we have our own challenges right now with crews and the availability of crews and getting crews to work on the railroad, and that has tended to slow us down. We're in a very competitive labor market right now. This industry pays very well for conductors and train engineers to operate them. So we've never had a problem recruiting, but suddenly in this post-COVID world, we are having more challenges because we're competing for the same labor pool as many other businesses and trades. And now you have workers who can be far more selective and choose different work lives, and quality of life decisions are taking a bit of a toll, even though we may pay more and compensate more. So you have people sometimes choosing to go work in warehouses so they can be close to home instead of driving a train and being away for a night or two. So that would be one example. So we're tracking our headcount very closely. We're trying to grow it. That has an impact on our network speed, which then therefore has an impact on our on-time departures and arrivals. So those are the things we track on a daily basis, and we're trying to improve upon. We think demand in the overall environment right now is still very, very strong, notwithstanding everything you hear about in the news about a potential recession. And I do believe that very well could come in time. It isn't here yet. We've got very strong demand, so we're tracking that as well.
Yeah, just you have a point of comparison with your earlier CFO tours of duty, where people were perhaps top of mind from time to time, but as you just described, it's an aspect of the business that many finance leaders are keeping a close eye on. I'm wondering if you find yourself, organizationally, have you been in closer touch with your human resources folks trying to figure out what's the right solution to repurpose people, like the example you shared with us, or to recruit, or to approach it differently, or allocate more capital to a certain part of the workforce that it's suddenly become so competitive? I don't know, but can you give us a sense of whether that's really happening? Whether you're calling up the HR folks saying, "Hey, we got to talk."
We are having virtually daily conversations with our HR folks in terms of our recruiting efforts, because we have 95 different hiring locations in our territory, which again is east of the Mississippi. So each one of those locations have to be appropriately staffed. If you have one or two locations that are short, it impacts the entire network. So you've got to get all 95 staffed up appropriately, because people are certified to operate in the radius around their hiring location. They can't, we don't move, it's unlike pilots where they can fly all over the US. You are certified to operate a train in only your certain geography where you're based. So we got to make sure that we're hiring in 95 locations. And we've got, call it a dozen or so that are particularly stressed with very low unemployment rates. So we're having daily conversations with our HR people and brainstorming what can we do to ramp up our recruiting efforts. We're going to trade schools, we're going back to the high schools. Uh, you know, to be perfectly honest, we've got all sorts of referral programs in place internally. Phone a friend. We're using all of our workforce to help recruit people personally instead of just relying on our HR recruiting. In fact, I personally recruited an Uber driver just about a month ago. So he's now going through our training program. And so all hands are on deck right now trying to find employees to come on board and join this really great industry, because it really does. It's a very fulfilling industry to work in because of the noble mission we have. We're moving America's economy, and we're a great sustainable solution in doing that.
Curious, as you stepped into the role and you learned the business, and you're at breakneck speed, no doubt. You had to find your way around and understand the dynamics of it so quickly. And along the way, I'm wondering if, you're wondering why there's a certain number that perhaps hasn't got the attention that you think it deserves, or maybe you had a different way of looking at things. And the people issue might be a good, it's sort of a broader issue that many companies are tackling. But is there an area of the business or something you have encouraged the organization to look at differently, or look at a certain number that reveals something a little differently? Is there anything like that that you've raised the profile of in some way, do you think? What would that be? Anything?
What's interesting with our business when we look at our people, because it is a people business. We need people to move the trains. And when you don't have enough people, you can't move the trains, everything starts to fall apart. Well, what we found is that we can sometimes have the people, but the people aren't always available to work. They might mark themselves off as unavailable because many of our folks, they're on call when we need them to move a train. We call them and they need to show up within 2 hours. So oftentimes people just will mark themselves off as unavailable, and that kind of really messes things up. So we've started to shift. Instead of looking at the gross number of people, we're looking at the percentage
Hmm.
available on any given day. And how do we manage around that? How do we increase availability? Would be one example. So, we've started to offer availability bonuses to try to incentivize people to make themselves more available, meaning don't mark yourself off as unavailable to go to a kid's sports event. If you'll get compensated extra by making yourself available. Those are some of the things that we're doing and we're focusing. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal, that you got to look at things a little bit different. So I won't personally take credit for that, but I'll just tell you that that's an area of nuance where we've discovered throughout all of this. It's not just the raw number of people, but it's the available number. And you can probably find similar learnings from that in other areas as
Interesting.
well.
Great example for us. Thank you for that. I just also wanted to touch on FP&A with you. I'm wondering if, as you arrived, someone who, as you revealed to us, have been dealing with spreadsheets for quite a while and number crunching, and figured out how to really evaluate potential acquisitions and what have you. I'm just wondering, as you think of yourself, because that's the way I think of you. You kind of quickly evolved into an FP&A person, which is, you don't always see happen the way it happened with you. I'm wondering, okay, where is that FP&A talent in your organization? And given the fact your roots are there, how do you develop those people? Is there anything that you've decided, we should try doing this more, or let me find more of these people? How do we find them? I don't know. When it comes to FP&A, what's your mindset or your strategic way of deploying those people?
All right, Jack, this may shock you, but when I came into Norfolk Southern after a career in the other company that I mentioned, where FP&A was very much ingrained into everything you do, and I had run FP&A in multiple functions, including at overall UTC. I came in here to Norfolk Southern, and we did not have an FP&A team. Finance was not structured with FP&A in mind. We had an accounting organization, we had a treasury organization, we had this quote unquote budgets organization. So after 6 9 months, I realized that we needed to restructure the organization and build out an FP&A superstructure. And it's one thing to create the function. It's another thing to create the culture where the rest of the organization understands the role of FP&A, the other departments, not outside of finance I'm talking about. And then the bigger challenge is to find the right kind of people with the right kind of skills to populate it and effectively operate within it. So I would say, I'm very proud of what we've done here in Norfolk Southern in creating this FP&A function. I got the right kind of leader who is collaborative and can think solution based, and not just problem oriented, but is trying to find solutions and shining the light for the rest of the organization to see where problems are, but also what potential solutions and roadmaps there are. So from getting the right leader, it was then around attracting the right kind of support. And I'm a big believer in team dynamics, and having the right personalities in place so that we can be business partners to the rest of the organization. So very much the screening for who was going to make up our FP&A team was around personality type. I didn't want a bunch of, uh, you know, auditors, call it black and white auditors who come out of accounting, with a singular mindset. I don't mind accountants coming in if I can see they've got the broader perspective in them. In fact, the leader of my FP&A team is a CPA accountant, but I could tell that he has got that broader dimensional view of business and is analytical by nature and also has a very collaborative spirit. So we found the right kind of people to populate the team. And what I'm really proud of is that the rest of the organization, whether it's the commercial folks or it's the operating folks, or even the other staff functions like IT, they're now pulling on FP&A as a business partner to help them evaluate initiatives, and they respect the work that comes out of the team. So right now we're really at the right hand supporting all the different functions, and I would say it's working better than envisioned just 2 years
So
ago.
you mentioned that leader, that FP&A leader. He's having a meeting down the hall in a conference room. The door swings open, and it's Mark George walking in. What are the people around that? What is his team thinking? Oh gosh, Mark's going to ask us about this. What are you going to? What do they think you're going to ask him about?
They're so embedded right now, which I'm really proud of. We're so embedded in a lot of extremely important initiatives to try to accelerate the recovery on our railroad and try to speed up the network that they know that I'm going to be asking about, what's the timing of recovery, the service recovery, because we have a couple of things that are in flight that they're responsible for supporting and analyzing with our operations team. And, I'm usually just trying to find out, what are the numbers looking like? How are we flushing things out? And how quick can we get on, to move forward here? So,
It's interesting you put this in place during COVID. I mean, this new organization, this group came to be during COVID. And maybe in some way, just given as you emphasize that collaborative nature, maybe as you begin to embed people, well, they were embedded on Zoom calls probably for a lot of this, right? And maybe in some ways, the remote world made it more easier, quicker. Who knows? Is there some sort of contrarian way of looking at this? Yeah.
no, you're exactly right. We put this together during COVID. We are now back in the office and we're working together in a hybrid environment. Everybody's in a couple few days a week, usually the same couple few days a week, with our business partners as well. And those relationships have really been building. And one thing we did early on when we went remote on COVID is, as a leadership team, we told everybody inside the organization, you've got to touch every single person every single day on Microsoft Teams with your cameras on. We got to start building and maintaining these relationships. So every day, everybody gets touched. And every meeting we have and organize throughout all of COVID, cameras on. It's all video all the time. And I'm really proud of that because it's not a perfect surrogate to in person, but it's certainly better than just audio only because now you're looking at people in their eyes, even if they're virtual eyes, and you're seeing facial expressions and you're seeing the smiles. And that was really important to continue to build the relationships between FP&A operations, our commercial and marketing folks, and the other functions, HR, IT, legal, et cetera. So those relationships started to form, and now they've, in this past 6, 9 months since we've been more in person together, it's really, really accelerated.
Excellent. Mark, thank you so much for the extra detail there. So we always have what we refer to as a finance strategic moment question, which is where we ask you finance leaders to look back over the span of their careers and just share one moment of strategic insight that they experienced. And because of their lines of sight, because of being a finance executive, they became aware of a dynamic or a risk or whatever it was, and they responded to it. Anything come to mind when we ask for just one finance strategic moment?
It's hard to pick one when you got 33 years of experience, but I guess I would go back to my very first major CFO role. Remember, I was CFO out in Asia for 6 years, and then I came back and ran FP&A globally for UTC as well as Otis. But then I got thrown into being the Carrier HVAC global CFO. And this is in September 2008. So we were on the cusp of the Great Recession, and the world was really turning upside down. And because Carrier is really on the front edge of the economy, we were feeling it immediately and sharply. So we really had an opportunity here to reset because at that point in time, Carrier had been an underperforming subsidiary when I had come in, and there was a lot of pressure on performance. So what we took a look at was, look, we're in a reset mode. Our profits and top line have contracted markedly. This is an opportunity to re-examine our entire business. So what we did is we took a look, and frankly, you would think a Carrier is one business. It wasn't. It was accumulated through a lot of M&A over decades, and we had about 100 discrete businesses. And when we built up Pareto, we said, a third of these businesses make either no money or they lose money. A third of them. So what we decided we were going to do, even though there were about $1 billion in revenue, or 8% of our revenue, we went on a divestiture spree to cull the portfolio around more of a cohesive core that we knew could grow and we should invest in. So we got rid of around 35 different businesses, and that had enabled us to invest all of that R&D money and focus and time and attention on the remaining 60 odd businesses and try to drive growth at that point. And I learned a lot going through that, helping develop that strategy and execute that strategy. And one is that strategies grow and strategies evolve around the time. And at one point, it made sense maybe to grow out this business, but you have to also prune, and you got to prune around the edges, because then what we did is we took a business that was trying to cut its way to growth, and with only marginal success, and instead now we created a business that we could invest in, and it really did grow the top line, and therefore the bottom line grew. And we got a lot of investor accolades for it. And it really was a hugely successful, pivotal moment in that enterprise. And that was, really in that 2010 through 2015 era where it really just ascended markedly and became best in class.
Hi, it's Jack. I hope you're enjoying our talk with CFO Mark George of Norfolk Southern Corporation. I have to say, this is the type of finance leader I love to interview because he has this kind of surprise chapter or surprise segue where he jumps from one industry, in Mark's case, the elevator industry at Otis Elevator, to the rail industry at Norfolk Southern. And in a way, we hear the excitement that Mark is experiencing this late in his career as he steps into a new role, and he has all this visibility and he has an entirely different business to learn. But you know what? It's not like sales. I don't think you'd want to do this in sales or marketing, make a similar leap. We know that finance executives have a set of skills and experience that are applicable elsewhere. But it's just interesting when a finance leader, a seasoned finance leader like Mark, opens up an entirely new chapter in an industry far and away from the last. Our talk with Mark George continues. In the mentoring round, we always begin with this question. Look, thinking back to that first time you got the CFO title. You were the CFO, and all the responsibilities of that title fell on your shoulders. If you could go back in time and just give yourself a piece of advice, and again, it's that first 60, 90 days you were in the position, what would it be? What would you tell yourself?
Ooh, that's a tougher one to answer. I guess let me answer it by saying there's a lot of things I learned in that 60 days to 10, 15 years after. And I've done a lot of evaluating on what's led to what's led to success for some people, and why others don't necessarily ascend in their career. First, as a CFO, it's very important that you make sure that you're not just running to be a CEO for the sake CFO, sorry, for the sake of being a CFO, but that you're actually matched up in the right circumstance. And it's really important that you are simpatico with your CEO. You've got to be, you've got to have good chemistry with your CEO. You may not always be aligned on every idea or every concept, but you have to have mutual respect so you can debate. And ultimately, you're going to have to give in if you can't convince your CEO on an idea you might have. Or at the same time, you have to acknowledge that maybe your initial idea is wrong. But you got to be able to have that dialogue, and you can only do that when you've got good chemistry with your CEO. So going into a situation where you and the CEO, maybe your personalities don't mesh, there may not be good chemistry there. It's not a recipe for success. You've got to be matched with the right kind of CEO to be a good CFO. And again, I'm not an accountant. I'm more of a business partner type. So that to me in particular was very important. I was never going to be a CFO who just sits in a box or in an office and just make sure that, my job is all about making sure the numbers are good. That I've always made sure that I've compensated my areas of weakness with outstanding controller types, who can keep the place running well from a number perspective, so that you can, as a CFO, be a close partner with your CEO, and that can only work if you've got the right chemistry. Some
Great,
of the other
great
things,
insight.
yeah, some of the other things I've just learned, generally speaking, if you don't mind me sharing, Jack.
No.
Um, 33 years of work experience. Why do some people ascend? And many of the colleagues I joined with really hit a ceiling early on. One is, people who ascend tend to run to fires, right? They want to be problem solvers, and they want to offer ideas and solutions. So that's one trait or attribute I think is evident in successful people. The other thing is, and there's always exceptions to this rule, but collaborative people versus combative people. Collaborative people tend to be pulled and into other organizations. People want them on their teams. People want problem solvers, and they don't want arrogance, and stubborn, combative individuals. And those are personality types, and so it's easy to say that be collaborative, don't be combative, but sometimes you are who you are, and so just moderate your expectations. If you're arrogant and combative, you may not have the same level of success. And we got a lot of people have ambition, which is great. Um, but you're going to be very, very frustrated in your career and your life if you don't have energy that exceeds your ambition level. You got to work with some energy here. And when energy exceeds ambition, good things happen. But when ambition exceeds energy, you're going to be frustrated,
Yeah.
because the energy ultimately is what's going to make an impact, to the company, and going to create the pull for you in your career.
Great, great way of looking at it. So thank you for that. We always ask guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side of things. We're wondering if you have a habit that you're known for, or part of a daily routine that you're known for. It might not be in the office. Certainly a family member might be more astute about this, but is there something that you do that sets you apart, something you're known for over time? What would that be?
Uh, Look, Jack, my father and mother taught me when I was very, very young. You follow the Ten Commandments and the Golden Rule, and that Golden Rule is appropriately referred to as golden, and it's really treating people the way you want to be treated. And that's just the way I operate myself. Is treat people with dignity and respect. It doesn't matter whether they're the janitor, or a maintenance person in the building, or a professional colleague, or someone who's a board member. Just treat people nice, and treat them as a human being. Go out of your way to converse with people, and take an active interest, a sincere interest, in people, not just platitudes and superficial conversations. So that's one of the things in terms of keeping me grounded in life. Just connecting with people at that level. And personally, I always tell the young people, IQ gets you in the door, but it's EQ that's going to help you advance. You've got to have a very strong emotional quotient in my type of organization for sure to ascend. I think EQ is just as important as IQ. You have to have a certain minimum IQ to operate effectively technically in your role, but EQ is critically important to be successful in your career.
Is there a book you'd recommend before we get to our final question? Is there a book, or it doesn't have to be a business book, but maybe it's something you escape with? Don't know, but what would you share?
Well, for the business books, I've never really been a business book lover or a consultant type of books. They just don't satisfy me. But the one that I did read that really resonated with me many years ago was a book called Authentic Leadership by Bill George. No relation to me, by the way. But that was the idea of authentic leaderships being seen as genuine and real, not trying to be somebody else. And that's what always bothered me about reading business books and Seven Habits of Highly Successful People. And ultimately, you got to be yourself, and you got to be your true self, and not try to take on traits or characters of others who you think would be successful. I think be yourself and be authentic, and be sincere. And if you're a good person, it's going to serve well for you. But the other book that I always loved was a tragic true story called Into Thin Air, which was a book of the very famous spring climbing season of Mount Everest. I think it goes back into the early 90s. And there were a lot of interesting stories there of challenges and triumphs and tragedies and how teams work together and very interesting team dynamics that can lead to failure and can lead to success and early warning signs that are ignored. Um, Failing to accept some of the ugly realities and ignoring them, and you can do that at your own peril. So there's a lot of interesting lessons that can be gleaned from that book as well, related to business and life in general.
Excellent. Great choices for us. Thank you for those. We are up to our final question, where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. And what we want to know is, what are your priorities as a CFO over the next 12 months? What would your priorities be?
Well, two things, I guess. One is to continue to be part of figuring out how to extract ourselves from the difficult supply chain challenges that we're part of today, that the country is facing. We're slowly pulling out of it, but we've got to staff up our organization, and I've got to make sure that we invest in all the right places, and we don't constrain ourselves from a spending perspective. We've got to do whatever it takes to speed up our network so we can move product and decongest the entire U.S. supply chain. The second thing is I've got to continue to develop the talent inside my own finance organization so that we can continue to be a really good partner for our business colleagues, our operation folks, as well as our marketing and IT folks. So those are the key priorities right now.
Mark George, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Jack, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.